One of my favorite new features in Corel Painter X3 are their new perspective guides. Now, in Painter versions up to X3, they did have a 2D perspective tool. It was serviceable, but it really wasn't very usable. But in this new version, they've got some really nice perspective tools that once you get used to using them will help you a lot when you need to have perspective in an image. So you may find it easier to have rulers set on so that you can show guides. You may or may not. It's up to you. I'm going to go ahead and turn them on just so that you can see the guides and how I might use them as I'm using the perspective guides. There are several ways to access the perspective guides. One way is up under Canvas. You can come down and go to Perspective Guides and enable Perspective Guides. And you see here the default 2-point perspective guide that comes up. And it's as simple as clicking and moving around these vanishing points. Each one of these points, of course, represents a vanishing point. So you can tilt your horizon. The red line represents the horizon line. You can tilt your horizon. You can move the vanishing points, swing them in or out, closer, farther away. You can zoom out so that you can see them in a larger sense on your image. But in this particular image, I'm more interested in their 3-point perspective grid. And up under this preset, you can see that there are two 3-point, a point top-down view and a 3-point worm's eye view. In this case, I'm looking at a top-down view. Now this brings up the perspective grid that you can see here. You may want to change some of these things up here. I don't mind so much the bright green color, but it's a little too green for me, so I'll usually tone it down just a little bit. The horizon line color is fine to me, and then the secondary lines, I generally like them something a little bit different and a little more opaque. You can change the density of them up or down. I'll show that in a moment. But the basics of this perspective guide. Again, the red line represents the horizon. You can tip the horizon, you can do things that you want, whatever you want with it. These vanishing points on the horizon line are about midway outside the frame of the picture. In this case, you may want to bring in a vertical guide and line it up in the middle. Now, sometimes I'll do this just to give me a sense of where vertical is. And then you can move the vanishing points out and around. You can grab the handles and you can make lines that are wider that converge toward a vanishing point. Pull them out. It's very flexible tool to use. You've got to make sure you grab the right point so you're not rotating the horizon line, but just moving the guide itself. In most cases, in 3-point perspective, you will probably maintain fairly horizontal horizon line. Now, you don't have to, but you may want to. Also, as a general rule, you're going to want to make sure that your vanishing points, all of these, are set outside of your image size. If you use this 3-point grid and your vanishing points are within your picture frame, like you can see I've got them here, in general 3-point perspective, I've got to stick with most of my drawing within this triangle formed by the vanishing points. If I don't, and I go out beyond it, I start to get extreme distortion outside of any of this triangle formed by the vanishing points. I get a lot of distortion that I can't compensate using the grid on. Fortunately, it's quite easy to keep your triangular grid quite a bit outside of your whole image so that you can have your whole image in perspective. And in this case, what I do is I've set my vanishing points way outside of my picture plane. That is one of the nice things too, is you can zoom out, still see the vanishing points and the grid lines, and you can drag them out and as wide and as far as possible. In this case, I'm trying for just a general 3-point perspective, and so I'm keeping this vanishing point under the midpoint line, and then I'm dragging these points on the horizon out even farther. And then to set up the basic grid, I'm going to go ahead and move this grid line down so it goes through this vanishing point, and then this grid line down so it does the same thing. Now you can see my image here is enclosed by this very large triangle. This is going to make it so that there's no areas that will have extreme distortion. I can line these up pretty much anywhere. I like to kind of line them up so that they cross on the center line. But if your center line's off, you can line them up anywhere that you would like. And then you can line these vanishing points or these grid lines up wherever you would like. You might want to go ahead and put them so they cross the vanishing point there. So now you got a big triangle. I'm going to turn on the secondary lines, the intermediate lines. Now you can see, and I will zoom in, I have my vanishing points, and I've got both my vertical and my two horizontal vanishing points on the horizon line showing. All of this now, again, because it's enclosed in this large triangle of vanishing points, all of this will be in correct perspective. It's a very important thing to remember when working with three-point perspective, to try to maintain that relationship of your overall image to a triangle. Now you can of course move the vanishing points wherever you want. You can bring them in any way you want. And again, try to just maintain things within a triangle and it will be fine. I would only have these very, very small corner areas that will be out of perspective. So for this particular image, what I'm most interested in is painting these cliff walls behind this character here. What I did to set that up is basically what I've just shown you, but I'll go through it step by step. I'm going to reset the tool. So it's reset. Got to make sure that I turn it on again. Goes back to the 2-point tool. So I'm going to pick this top-down view. And here again are my two vanishing points on the horizon and my one vertical vanishing point that's pretty much underneath this vertical line here. I of course moved these out. I moved the vanishing point up, or the horizon line up, while I moved these out. And then I aligned this down a little farther. I wanted to make the cliffs on this side, to line that up out to this edge. And then I wanted to bring this down. Because I wasn't going to be seeing a lot of things down in this area, and I was maybe going to put a little bit of perspective on this area that he's sitting on, this cliff shelf, I can pull it down that far, but I know that I'm going to put a rock wall in here, at least I think I'm going to, so I don't really have to pull it farther out than that. I have to raise this guideline up high as it's going to be on the cliff line here, and then this one down as low as I think I might be able to see this cliff here. You can see right now that I'm off a little bit, so I'm going to have to pull this guide way out. That is, unless I want to change the angle of this kind of shelf that he's sitting on. And I could, it doesn't really matter one way or the other. I'll zoom out a little bit more, pull that out. So now I've got this one guideline that's lining up on the shelf that he's on, and I can go ahead and pull it down here because I'll get an intermediate guide that crosses that just fine. As far as the lines going up, I will want the vanishing point to probably be down here about where it is, and then I'll pull this off, or this rough area in my sketch. I might even pull it off along onto here. And then this side I want to kind of got some indication of some lines on some cliffs coming up on here. Pull it up that way. So now I've got my basic lines set up. My guidelines for the horizontal kind of streaks in the cliffs here. My guidelines for the horizontal streaks in this cliff. And then my vertical lines. I'm going to go ahead and change the color to the different color and put these guidelines in, the intermediate guides, increase the opacity a little bit so that I can see them, and come in here and have a look and see if things are going to line up on my sketch pretty well. The horizontal lines lining up on the cliffs. At this point in my sketch, it doesn't really matter if they're lined up exactly, because I'm going to be using them to draw this sketch a little more carefully and get things in perspective. In the rough sketch, I'm only just kind of thinking where the perspective may be. I can increase the density of the grid lines or decrease it if I want. This is a very nice feature, being able to zoom out quite a bit so you can see your whole image and move the lines around to get them to work just like you want them to work. Density may be a little too high, so I'll back it off just a little bit. And this is pretty much good enough for what I want. What I'll do at this point is there's another pretty neat feature you can use. Go back and pick a paintbrush. And you can see all the lines disappeared. They're still there. If you want to see them, you can come back in, click on the perspective guide toolbox tool right here, and you can see them again. So you can move them around anytime you want. But come in with a paintbrush, pick pens. I want to use flat color, and I want to make this a small brush. So down to maybe 2 pixels. We'll go with 2 pixels. And I'm going to start with a dark red color. So you can see what I've got there. Now what I've got going is this little checkbox right here, perspective guided strokes. Create a new layer, and I'll come in and draw some perspective guided strokes. Because I'm on a new layer, I'm essentially just making a perspective guide to use. You can zoom in closer, head out so you can see the cursor. And it's really nice. It'll snap to the guide. And in one direction, I'll do it this color. Now see, you don't even have to have a guideline, which is a nice thing too. If I decided I wanted to put one in between, I can put one in between and it will maintain the correct orientation and converge to the same vanishing point. Very, very nice touch, I think. So you don't even have to be exactly on the guidelines to do this. And again, if you want to adjust them at any time, you can do that. It will negate how accurate your lines are, but you can do that. And I may not need lines everywhere. I may just need them down here on what he's sitting on and on that one wall. And I'll just draw, I'm just on a new layer drawing a perspective guide that I can use without having the guide turned on all the time. The guide's fantastic, but it is distracting to have turned on when I'm painting, so I'll get rid of it when I'm painting. Then I'll change colors and come in from the opposite direction. I can come in and just put in the lines that I think I'm going to need. And you can draw the whole thing if you want. It obviously is a tool that you can use and do as much or as little as you think you're going to need. Change color again. Let's see, I got green and red, so let's go maybe purple. And I'll draw my vertical lines down. I just need to zoom out a little bit. Like so. I'll put one more kind of in the edge here. I'll zoom out. I'll come back up here to the guide section. So here's my grid, and I'll come in the presets here and I'll add it as a preset in case I need to use it again. So name it whatever you want and click Save. Now, if I reset everything, I can come back under the presets and it will bring that grid back up. So if you need to repeat an image or exact point of view, anything like this makes it really, really simple. And you can go ahead and turn it off. And usually what I'll do with this is I will take the layer and I'll lower the opacity quite a bit. I can still see the lines, and I'll lock the transparency on this and also name it the perspective grid. And now I can turn it on or off as I'm drawing, and I can keep things in perspective. I can come back at any time and create a new grid if I want. Very, very nice grid system. Very easy to use once you get used to it. You can be as accurate or as kind of free form as you want. Very, very nicely done tool.